My name is Jamiel Sorita, and you're watching Movie News, the YouTube channel. A long, long time ago, in a time before the Americas even existed, there was a Europe with a country called Spain. At some point, Spain was conquered by a different kingdom, by a different group of people who were of Islamic origins. And these people affected the way Spain became as a country. At some point, they allowed other cultures to coexist. A more ancient version of what the United States is supposed to be, if you will. On with that, they allowed the Jewish people to live there. They allowed the Islamic people and the Christians to live all together. They didn't necessarily kick anyone out. But then eventually they fought against the people who claimed to be the original Spaniards, and the other people, they lost. And there was a new king and queen who installed Catholicism for everybody, one religion for the whole country. Later, those same people sent Christopher Columbus on his journey to the Americas, which he found the Caribbean. They eventually found Central and South America as well. When they sent their people, these people were already mixed because of their history with the Islamic kingdom, I think. So how does that affect the new people, the new generations of people that were created when they came to the Americas? Because there was a new people that was created through rape, through murder, through basically all the horrible things you would ever think about. That's how the conquistadores were. And that affected and changed the kind of people you would see in South and Central America and in the Caribbean, which eventually they all get called together the Latin Americas. Because there's new peoples who all speak Spanish, because that was the language that Spain imposed on all the people they owned, on all the countries they owned. So with that, that kind of brings the history of both Ecuador and Colombia. Later, though, people from those two countries came to New York, and I was created. So I was created from different generations of people who all eventually somehow met each other to creating this one person who's making this YouTube video right now. As I got older, I always kind of wondered about my identity, trying to figure out who I am as a person. Because my history, my family's history, only goes back into the 80s in this country, the United States. But I know that me being born and living here means that I'm going to shape somehow the future of the United States history. So at some point, all the things that I lived through and all of us lived through is going to change the way the United States is as the future becomes the past. So as I got older, I tried to understand more about that. I learned a little bit about the history about Latin America, which I just told you guys a little bit. It's not entirely accurate, but it's, I guess, the Cliff Notes version of it. With that, I tried to understand more of who I am as a person. I think that when I was younger, I didn't really like Spanish, and I would always make jokes about people who try to speak Spanish. So eventually I got my karma, because when I was around 12 or 13 years old, I started speaking the way Americans speak Spanish, which was really a shame. It put me to shame. And I started watching Spanish TV shows and movies to try to learn it, because it's honestly the easiest and best way to do it, because you get entertained and you're also learning something, So with that kind of continues my journey down this rabbit hole of finding out who I am. Because eventually I started realizing that there were so many TV shows and movies, for example, about Colombia, that deal with drugs and prostitutes. And I'm pretty sure that whatever we see on the theaters, especially if you don't travel, kind of creates the kind of idea that you have about the rest of the world. So that's always how it's always been. Some people, for example, they would make movies that they claim were based on a true story, but obviously in order to make it entertaining, they change it, and they change a story, and then people think, oh wow, this is how these people were always? They're so bad. They're so horrible. Or they're just they're just really poor, and that's really bad. Or they deserved it, or whatever opinion they get from a story. Because the thing about a story is that it's about point of view. Because the person who created it usually gets to create the way the story looks. That's just the way it works. So with that, I started thinking about, is it possible to get rid of stereotypes so people can get more respect And the truth is, it is possible to get rid of stereotypes in the movies. You can start by just casting people who are from the actual nation. You can also start by having writers and directors from those countries put their perspective on how their country is. Because obviously, no one has a more intimate understanding of a culture or country than if they're living in it. You know? So the issue is that a lot of Colombian movies and TV shows I don't think necessarily get to be seen because their production value, for example, isn't very high, and a lot of times it's under the category of like telenovela, which translates to TV novel in Spanish, and so a lot of times those TV novels or soap operas, they are in like huge chunks, usually around maybe 100 or like 120 episodes per season. Nothing like American on TV, which is why the production value of American TV shows are so much higher because they always make them in like small groups of 10 episodes or maybe 20 episodes maximum, you know? So I think that if we work on this idea of representation, we make more stories about Colombians and Ecuadorians. For example, you could start by making stories about Ecuadorians and Colombians who live in this country, because that doesn't really happen a lot because they don't have as much influence as, for example, Mexico and Puerto Rico does. Mexico because they're literally the neighbors of the United States, and Puerto Rico is owned by the United States, and a lot of the Puerto Rican people who are born with citizenship because of that. So they have an easier way to tell their story. They have a better way to tell their story, and people see everybody's either maybe Mexican or Puerto Rican if they speak Spanish, which is obviously not true because Spanish has so many countries that they conquered that there's so much culture and so much story and there's so much people to really tell apart from that it doesn't work interchangeably using actors from different countries to represent a different story from a different country. So I think that when I'm talking about a lot of this, I think representation is very important, and also creating a universal story. What does that mean? It's something that's very true about American movies. They make stories about comedies, action, drama. It doesn't matter what category it falls into, but it's still considered an American story because I guess the immigration story kind of just says, oh, everything that happens here is an American story a lot of times. But with like South America or Colombia, the stories that they tell are the ones that get seen by people is the same ones. It's the one about drugs, it's the one about prostitutes. It's like saying that that's their country. It's exactly what it is. When obviously it's so much more. You have the food, you have the style, you have on the people's histories themselves. There's even prejudice in their own country between different groups of people, just like anywhere else. And when you start to really think about it in that terms and start thinking about the actual elements of what makes a good story, interesting characters, then whatever story you have to sell to another country, it's going to get sold because people are going to want to watch it. And I think that's my theory about it is you just have to make a good movie and good TV show with high production value so people actually want to see it. Or so it becomes popular at least. So that also affects the way people see you. And I think that, so nation, ethnicity, and culture is something very important. But I also know that living here in the United States, there's a lot of prejudice against immigrants. There's a lot of like animosity against them, saying they're going to steal our jobs and that they shouldn't be speaking their language in this country. But how can you claim that the United States is an immigrant's country if you don't let them bring what makes them an immigrant with them? They lose all of that because they're all trying to assimilate into just speaking English, which technically isn't the actual official first language of the United States. There is no official language. So with that comes on the understanding of who I am as a person, the understanding of how to make people like me more visible in this country. All of that comes together to be who I am as a person. My love of the movies creates my ideas and my thoughts about how the movie industry can change the way people are viewed, because not everybody has enough money to travel to another country. That's really something that's not as, I guess, popular or as big as of a thing as other things might be in this country because of money. Not everybody can afford to do that. With that, I think that the last thing I want to say here is just that on as a person, I have a fear that maybe one day I'm going to have a child in the future and they're not going to speak Spanish. And this partially could be possible because of the fact that in this country they don't appreciate like how amazing the Spanish language really is. So the kids, the child or the next generation might be like, "Oh, I don't want to talk about my culture. I don't want to use it. I'm American. I only speak English." And it's really bad because then that means that all the effort of my ancestors, my family, my own effort to be connected with my roots and my culture is going to be gone because the new generation only speaks English. And I think that kind of sucks. So I know that part of my life goal is to kind of have people understand that cultures and really embracing where your family comes from, whether it's this country or another country, is what makes us unique. It's part of what makes life beautiful and rich. That there's so much different things to do. Even though you might be comfortable with one thing, you shouldn't go and knock somebody else's cultures or beliefs because that's a part of what makes them unique and interesting and awesome and amazing as people. So I just wanted to say that, talk about culture and talk about how we could work on representation by just simply making interesting stories because of the fact that if we do it here in the United States, we could make better stories that people are going to want to watch because a lot of American films have very high production value compared to like other countries' films. Sometimes I've seen like a couple of Colombian movies that look more like they were made in the 1980s. And that's obviously because of production value and maybe because the director isn't up to par to something that I've seen here. And that means that if we're always going to be behind, whether it's Colombia, Ecuador, or other countries, we're going to be behind, then our stories and our representation as people and the way that we get treated as people will always be affected because people won't actually go and pay to see it or they won't have empathy with us. So I think that in order to construct and to change and to have a better accepting world, if we work on films that aren't about our stereotypes, whether, it doesn't matter what country you're from, and you work on something instead that's based on character driven, that's based on story, that can inform people in an entertaining way, then we can make a more inclusive and amazing world where everyone's culture gets accepted and everyone gets to feel like they have something, they got something from their family. Their inheritance is their culture and their looks and all of this. And I think that when we do that, when we try to understand who we are as people, we become richer, more interesting people. So I just want to say thank you for watching the video. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Until next time.